Energy prices are climbing more than twice as fast as inflation as the impacts of Trump administration policies begin to take effect.
Across the United States, energy prices are climbing at a pace households cannot ignore. The Consumer Price Index rose by 2.7% over the past 12 months, but energy bills jumped more than 5.5%. Nearly 60 utility companies are preparing to raise rates in 2025, adding more than $38 billion for electricity customers and another $3.5 billion for natural gas users. Demand for power is surging faster than at any point in decades.
We have never seen a demand for energy at this level for decades, and a lot of that is driven by data centers, artificial intelligence, electric cars, the way we're electrifying our lives. We're requiring more power now than we ever have for decades.
Data centers for artificial intelligence, the spread of electric vehicles, and the electrification of daily life are putting immense pressure on an aging grid. At the very moment when President Donald Trump is calling for manufacturing to return to American soil, the foundation of that vision, cheap and reliable energy, is under strain. Recently, Trump held a call with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Ottawa described it as a wide-ranging conversation on trade and economic priorities. The call raises a larger question. If America wants to bring production back home, and if energy is the missing piece, was Trump reaching out to Canada because he knows that Carney holds much of what he needs? Trump has built his second term around tariffs as a lever to force companies back to U.S. soil. This month, he announced a 100% tariff on imported semiconductors, with exemptions only for firms that commit to manufacturing inside the United States. The goal is clear. By raising the cost of imports, Washington hopes to push supply chains to relocate. This strategy does not stop with technology. Tariffs on steel and aluminum remain at 50%. Imports of transformers and electrical equipment essential for the grid are also caught. The administration wants to tilt the playing field toward domestic production, but the unintended consequence is rising costs for the very infrastructure needed to power Trump's vision. Coal plants are being kept open longer, and proposals for new gas plants have been revived. Yet building a plant takes years, and turbine costs have tripled. Coal is still more expensive than natural gas or renewables. Regulators warn that extending the life of coal plants will add costs that utilities pass on to customers. The paradox is clear. Tariffs may bring factories back, but they also risk driving energy bills higher.
My government fully recognizes that to build Canada into an energy superpower will make Canada the global supplier of choice for critical metals and minerals, diversifying our trading partners and increasing our strategic leverage with the United States.
While the United States struggles with higher costs, Canada holds almost everything Trump needs to realize his ambition. Prime Minister Mark Carney has outlined a plan to build Canada into an energy superpower. His government is investing in critical minerals and clean power generation. British Columbia alone hosts 16 types of critical minerals used in solar panels, electric vehicles, and semiconductors. Ottawa is funding infrastructure to connect resources from mine to rail to market, aiming to become the supplier of choice outside China and Russia. At the same time, Canada is scaling up solar, wind, hydrogen, and nuclear energy, while promising to make its conventional oil and gas the lowest emission in the world. Canada already supplies over 4 million barrels of oil per day, more than 8 billion cubic feet of natural gas daily, and more than 80% of U.S. electricity imports. It also provides about a quarter of the uranium fueling U.S. nuclear plants. These are not marginal figures. They are the backbone of North America's energy system. That is why the recent phone call between Trump and Carney deserves attention. Ottawa described it as a productive discussion on trade and economic priorities. The White House offered no public details. But the timing speaks for itself. As American demand for electricity accelerates and as tariffs raise the cost of building energy infrastructure, Canada stands out as the only reliable partner with the scale to fill the gap. The trajectory is clear. Trump's tariffs may generate headlines and political momentum, yet they carry a price that American consumers are already beginning to pay. Canada, by contrast, is strengthening its position as a strategic energy power. No matter how ambitious the effort to bring manufacturing back to America, it cannot succeed without energy. And in North America, much of that energy runs through Canada.
We've announced a 50% tariff on products from Brazil, and that includes beef.
Beef prices have soared to all-time highs, with many families feeling the squeeze.
Almost 90% of Americans now say they're stressed about grocery prices.
Beef has always been at the heart of the American dinner table, from backyard burgers to steakhouse ribeyes. Yet by the summer of 2025, families across the country are staring at grocery receipts with disbelief. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, ground beef climbed to an average of $13.49 per kilogram in June, the highest level ever recorded, up nearly 12% from a year earlier. What once cost $4.99 a pound just a few months ago now rings up closer to $7.99. Behind that sticker shock stands a major policy shift. President Donald Trump imposed a 50% tariff on beef from Brazil, the single largest foreign supplier to the United States. Before the tariff, Brazil accounted for between 21 and 27% of America's beef imports. In 2024, the United States brought in 229,000 tons of Brazilian beef, and in just the first half of 2025, 181,000 tons valued at nearly $1 billion. With tariffs this steep, that flow has slowed to a trickle. The question now is simple. If Brazil turns away from the US and leans into Canada instead, what happens to the American market? In early 2025, U.S. buyers leaned heavily on Brazilian beef to cover shortfalls at home. Herd sizes in America were already at their lowest since 1961 due to drought and high feed costs, and imports filled the gap. By April, imports from Brazil peaked at nearly 48,000 tons in a single month. But the story shifted quickly. By July, the total plunged to less than 10,000 tons, an 80% collapse in just 3 months.
So I think we'll see imports from Brazil decline pretty dramatically simply because of that tariff. Now, that also works to reduce our supplies of beef, which works towards keeping prices higher.
The World Trade Organization has already received a formal complaint from Brazil, arguing that Washington's new 50% tariff on Brazilian beef violates international trade rules. Yet even before any ruling, the numbers tell the story. Without Brazilian supply, the U.S. market is losing an estimated 400,000 tons of beef a year, equal to 4 to 5% of domestic consumption. That gap is worth roughly $1 to $1.3 billion in trade value. It has driven wholesale beef prices up by 21% since January, according to USDA data, while consumer prices for beef cuts have climbed between 8 and 12% over the past year. Every link in the chain is feeling the pinch, from meat packers forced to pay more for cattle to burger chains deciding whether to shrink portion sizes or raise menu prices. But what if Brazil, instead of sending its beef to the United States, redirected more of it to Canada? What would that shift mean for both markets? As U.S. tariffs shut the door, Canada has become a natural alternative for Brazilian beef. Ottawa reopened its market in late 2024, with imports already worth $39 million in 2023 and rising 44% in the first quarter of 2025. Brazil is also reviving Mercosur trade talks with Canada, a move that could further increase flows north. Though the overall volume is smaller than U.S. demand, Canada is seizing this moment to diversify supply and present itself as a more reliable partner while Washington looks unpredictable. The implications for the United States are stark. Losing Brazilian beef means a tighter supply of grinding beef used in burgers, higher retail prices that hit household budgets, and billions in added costs across the supply chain. Importers face lost revenue or higher bills when turning to Australia or Argentina. Processors report thinner margins as boxed beef prices rise. Retailers see sales volume shrink even as shelf prices climb. Restaurant owners, especially fast food chains, admit costs are climbing faster than they can adjust menus. Meanwhile, Canada is not under Trump's shadow. It is strengthening trade channels, drawing new supply lines, and reminding global partners that it can be a stable counterweight. Trump's tariff gamble may demonstrate power at the negotiating table, but in practice, it leaves American families paying record prices while giving Canada a chance to expand its role in North American beef trade.
35% tariff is now in place on some Canadian goods. And one Canadian industry that Washington has taken particular issue with is dairy.
In early August 2025, President Donald Trump took another step in his aggressive trade strategy. He raised tariffs on Canadian non-USMCA goods from 25% to 35%, escalating tensions at the border. Although the dairy sector itself is not directly hit by these new tariffs, Canada's dairy supply management system has long been a thorn in Trump's side. For years, he has portrayed it as an unfair barrier that protects Canadian farmers while limiting U.S. access to the market. Now, with broader tariffs in place and trade talks under strain, the question is whether Trump can force change in a policy Canada has vowed to defend at all costs.
Supply management is designed to protect dairy farms. There are limits to how much Canadian dairy farms can produce and how much from the United States can be imported to Canada.
Canada's supply management controls how much dairy is produced domestically and how much foreign product can enter the market. Imports from the U.S. are capped at roughly 3.5% of Canada's dairy market. If that limit is exceeded, tariffs skyrocket, 241% on milk and nearly 298.5% on butter, according to the Canadian Border Services Agency. The system has been in place for over 6 decades, designed to keep prices stable and protect thousands of family-run farms from being outcompeted by massive U.S. operations that can house tens of thousands of cows.
The dairy industry falls under CUSMA regulations, but U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly complained, saying it's an unfair deal for his country's producers.
From Washington's perspective, this is the very definition of a trade barrier. American producers already send about $800 million worth of dairy products to Canada annually, while Canada exports roughly $300 million in dairy south of the border. To Trump and his allies, the limits, and the high tariffs beyond them, mean lost opportunities for U.S. farmers. Just weeks before these latest tariff increases, Canada's parliament passed legislation that forbids using supply management as a bargaining chip in future trade negotiations. The bill enjoyed cross-party support, with advocates pointing to past trade deals where portions of the market were conceded despite political promises to protect it. Now, any government that wants to change the system would have to repeal the law and pay a steep political price. This protection isn't just about Quebec, the heartland of Canadian dairy. Farmers in British Columbia, Alberta, and even the Northwest Territories see supply management as essential for economic stability. It's a rare national consensus in an often divided political landscape. Canadian officials, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, know what's at stake. Loosening supply management too far could allow foreign dairy to take up to 18% of the domestic market, a level that industry groups warn would undermine the system entirely. That could mean farm closures, job losses, and declining rural economies. Beyond defending dairy, Canada has leverage of its own. The U.S. relies heavily on Canadian energy, critical minerals, and integrated auto supply chains. These sectors give Ottawa bargaining power that extends far beyond milk and butter. In trade talks, it's not just about defending one industry. It's about maintaining a balanced, mutually beneficial agreement. Trump may have expected the same playbook to work here as it has elsewhere: apply tariffs, demand changes, and secure a quick win. Instead, Canada's legal safeguards and political unity have slowed the process to a crawl. The dairy sector remains protected, with Ottawa signaling it is ready to walk away from a bad deal rather than concede on supply management. Meanwhile, U.S. dairy producers still face oversupply, volatile prices, and stiff competition abroad. Higher tariffs on other Canadian goods risk hurting American importers more than they help U.S. farmers, a reminder that not every bluff works in Washington's favor.